I'm going to be setting up my Dillon 550B to reload 32 auto. The parts I purchased are the Dillon Deluxe Quick Change Assembly, which consists of a tool head, the powder measure, powder die, which is what I call the powder bar. And if you're looking at the powder die, you'll probably recognize that it's a different color. That's because this is actually the Arredondo powder die that I bought from uniquetech.com. I do have a separate video on how I installed this powder die, because when you get them, they're generally too thick, and they do that on purpose. So you have to work with it to get it into your powder measure. And it also comes with a tool head stand, which I have already mounted on my bench, and we'll see a separate image of that right now. I also purchased the caliber conversion kit for the 32 auto. It consists of shell plate, the 3 locator pins, and the powder funnel. Now the powder funnel goes into the powder measure, and we can go ahead and install that right now. I'm going to use a 5/32 Allen wrench and just remove these 2 screws. And then this little plate comes off, and then it separates out. Now my powder funnel, when I got it, had some rust on it, so I took a cleaning patch, put some oil on it, and rubbed the rust off. So the powder funnel just drops right in, and then you install it back. And this latch has a little protrusion, and it actually goes in that opening right there. And then we attach it back. Even though I'm a big fan of the Dillon press, I actually like other dies better. My preference in dies is the Redding. On my other calibers I reload, I've got the Redding micro adjustable seating die and crimp die. Unfortunately, Redding did not make a micro adjustable dies for the 32 auto. However, the Hornady dies does have the ability to be micro adjustable if you buy the extra Hornady micro adjustables for their seating stem. So in this kit is a sizing and depriming die. Now, if you've watched some of my other videos, you know that I really don't like using the press to deprime and reprime my brass. I actually do that outside of the press. So I would actually just remove this and set it aside. This die I really can't use. This is a expander, or the bell die. When the brass goes up inside of here, it actually puts the bell onto the brass. But since I have a 550B, which is a 4-stage press, I cannot use this die. And as I go to install everything, This micro adjust stem would actually replace this part here and screw right in. But I'll do that when I set up the dies on the tool head. The other items I purchased is a dust cover for when this and the tool head are sitting on the tool head stand. Bore snake 32 caliber. Now you may be asking, what has that got to do with reloading? Well, if you watch my favorite reloading gadgets video, you would see that I actually use a bore snake to clean my dies. Over time, your dies can have a buildup of lubricant, maybe bits of brass or lead inside. So what I do is I take the bore snake and run it up through the dies to clean them. You can see me actually doing that in the video, My Favorite Reloading Gadgets. Okay, we're ready to get started. First thing we're going to do is remove the current shell plate and the 3 brass locator pins. To do that, we need to raise the shell plate to the top. Then we take a 1/8 inch Allen key and remove the lock screw from the back side. Needs to come all the way out. That's what it looks like. Then we lower the shell plate and remove the bolt. Sprocket arm. The shell plate. The shell plate will go into the tool head stand. And then the 3 brass locator pins will also go on the tool head stand. Now what I typically do at this point is take a duster cloth and then clean all this area in here, including the chute. This way I'll pick up any loose powder, any brass filings, any small pieces of lead or whatever, just clean it all up. Once that is done, we'll take our caliber conversion kit, remove the shell plate, and what we're going to do is the large ball bearing is going to go in one of these smaller holes. And then we're going to orient it so that the shell plate holding are lined up with the proper stations. Then we're going to put the sprocket arm back on. And what I do at this point, and I've done it recently so I don't need it again, I actually put a small amount of gun grease on the underside of the bolt head. This reduces the amount of friction between the stationary bolt and the sprocket arm. I also put a little bit of gun grease on the threads. And then we tighten it. And as we tighten it, I'll just occasionally turn it and to make sure it's all the way down. Again, this is mostly personal preference. You just don't want the shell plate to have a lot of vertical movement to it. Okay. When I've got it where I like it, I raise it. Then I reinsert the lock screw. And I do tighten this one down. Now the 3 brass locator pins, we can put in those later because as we adjust the dies, it'll be easier just to pull the brass out without the pins in there as we do our adjustments. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is remove the existing tool head. First we want to disconnect what Dillon calls a fail-safe arm. Just raise the shell plate a little bit on the little plastic holder here, pull it down, the arm will come off and then come out. Now I have a light mounted on my tool head, so I have to pull it out. Then we remove the two black secure pins. Then the tool head comes straight out and goes onto your tool head stand. Then we take a new tool head, install it, put in the black secure pins. First thing we're going to start on is the resizing die. This is the Hornady die I showed you earlier. We're going to move the lock nut all the way to the top. For purposes of this demo, I've left the primer punch in, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So we'll screw it in. Now at this point, we want to raise the shell plate and screw this in until it touches the shell plate. Now my personal preference is I don't like it actually touching the shell plate, because that means every time I work the press, I'm hitting the underside of this die. What I do, again this is my personal preference, I take a 3x5 card, cut off a little piece, and then I insert it, place it on the shell plate, and then I'll run it down till it touches. And of course I will remove the car bar later. So for me, there's a thickness of a 3x5 card that separates the die from the shell plate. That way, as I work the press, I'm not constantly banging the shell plate against the bottom of the die. So we just work this down until it stops. All right, there we go. It's touching right there. I don't want to get any tighter than that. So lock this in place. Now, as luck would have it, I've got the lock ring in such a position that the point of tighten is actually on this side. Now, right now that's okay, but if for some reason, once I have all the dies in, I need to loosen this, I can't, because I can't get to it. So let's back it out and see if I can reverse the ring and get it in a better position. If not, I'm going to have to rummage through my parts to see if I can find a different kind of lock ring. I'm just going to run this out, turn it over, run it back on. Run it in. Take it down again, right there. All right, where did that end up? It did not end up in a good position because it's now over here. So I'm going to stop the video and go look for a different lock ring. All right, I looked at my spare parts bag. I found these rings, but the lock screws on the exterior. So I got two choices of how to put it, so let's give it a try. If you're going to use the paper technique I'm using, make sure that your primer punches up out of the way, otherwise it's going to be punching down through the paper. I'm holding the arm and I'm watching in there. Alright, there's a touch. Keeping the dies steady. Let's turn the lock ring down. Alright, now before we tighten it, I'm going to leave it a little bit loose right here. I'm going to remove my piece of paper. I'm going to put in factory fresh brass. Raise it up slowly into the die, keeping the die still. Lock down the ring. I'm going to get some pliers, and I'm going to tighten the ring down. I'm going to use an Allen key to lock it in place. Not real hard, but just enough. That feels good right there. Next, we're going to adjust for the primer punch. With the brass still in the plate, I'm going to screw this down until it bottoms out on the brass right there. I'm going to back it off a little bit because I don't want it actually bending the brass. And then I'll screw this down to lock it in place. That'll give us enough punch to make sure that it pushes the primer completely out of the brass. Now, for those of you who watch some of my other videos, you know I don't like depriming and priming inside the press, so I'm actually going to remove this now. I'm going to put this, which is actually a very high quality punch, into my spare parts bag. Now we've got our sizing die all set up. Next thing to work on is our powder measure. Now we are ready to install the powder assembly. Make sure the powder funnel is installed. We did that earlier, and that the lock ring is all the way up. To make installing the powder assembly easier, I like to completely remove the primer assembly. If you have primers in the primer assembly, be sure to keep the primer assembly upright at all times so the primers will not fall out of the shield top. The entire assembly is attached to the press with two small hex bolts. So using a hex key, I'm going to remove the two bolts. First, we remove the spring that attaches the primer bar to the press. Then we raise the shell plate and then loosen the two screws. Remove the primer assembly, and we can leave the black spacer plate in place. Then we lower the shell plate. Now that the primer assembly is removed, let's start installing the powder assembly in the tool head, and then discuss the purpose of the powder measure. Since I have removed the primer assembly, I've gone ahead and tightened down these two bolts. The powder measure has two purposes. One is to drop the correct amount of powder into a case, and this is controlled by the powder bar. Now, the powder bar should not be adjusted until all the dies have been installed and we can produce a dummy round at the proper overall length and crimp. The second purpose of a powder assembly is to flare or bell the mouth of the case. This is controlled by how far down the powder assembly is installed into the tool head. The reason we flare or bell the case mouth is to make bullet seating easier. When installing the powder assembly, we need to make sure that as the press cycles, that on the upstroke, when the shell plate is lowered, the powder bar is moved completely forward until the stop pin is pushed against the powder measure. It is the upstroke when powder from the hopper is dropped into the powder bar. We also need to be sure that on the downstroke, when the shell plate is raised to the top, that the powder bar is moved completely back until the powder bar face is even with the powder measure. It is the downstroke when powder from the powder bar is dropped into the case. We want to keep in mind that as we fine-tune the size of the flare, the powder bar should be fully back because that is the position the powder bar will be in when the case gets flared. So how much case mouth flare do we need? The answer is as little as possible. Too much flare will put excessive stress on the metal and cause premature splitting or cracking at the case mouth. Too little will cause a shaving of lead or copper when the bullet is seated. So what we want is a flare that is wide enough to seat the bullet and prevent bullet shaving, but not so wide as to put excessive stress on the case mouth. Let's take a close look at case flare. For control purposes, we will take factory fresh brass, size it, and measure the case mouth and record that number. Now we will place the brass in stage 2 and raise the shell plate. Now I want to turn the powder assembly down until I get resistance. I get resistance in this area. I'm going to lower the shell plate. I have learned that if I leave the powder measure loose by loosening these 2 screws and the powder bar not fully back, that when I tighten the powder measure and connect the fail-safe arm, then the powder assembly no longer has the correct setting, which is why I've already tightened down these 2 screws. And I will continually check to make sure that the powder bar is fully back. At this point, I'll turn the powder measure down by a small amount, raise the shell plate, flare the brass, check it, and if I don't have enough flare, keep repeating the process until I get the desired flare. Again, the right amount of flare is just wide enough to seat a bullet and prevent bullet shaving. The way I check it is by actually trying to seat a bullet, and since bullets vary in size, I'll use several bullets to check. I also use calipers to measure the amount of flare and compare it to the resized number. Now, while there is no correct number, it does tell me how much each turn changes the size of the flare. So let's get started. This is a good seat because the bullet is firmly seated, and when I look at it from above, I do not see any large gaps between the bullet and the case. And what I'm going to do is remove the bullet, take my calipers and measure the case mouth, and record that number and keep that number with my reloading data for this caliber. Now we're going to tighten down the lock ring, but before tightening, we want brass in both stages 1 and 2 to maintain the alignment between the shell plate and the tool head. This is the case that we're using to check the flare. This is factory fresh brass. Raise the shell plate. Lower the arm completely. So I've moved my light out of the way, and now I'm going to manually tighten the lock ring. Then I will use pliers to lock the ring down, and then I'll use the Allen wrench to lock it in place. Now that it's locked down, we're going to lower the shell plate. At this point, we need to reposition the powder measure so they can be connected to the fail-safe arm. Taking the Allen wrench, we're going to loosen these two bolts. Now we're going to turn the powder measure so that it is in line with this arm. Now we're going to attach the fail-safe arm to the belt crank. It has to go through these two openings. Raise the arm, insert the bushing. And what I want to do is look at a couple different angles to make sure that the arm is straight up and down. Now that I've got it positioned where I want it, I'm going to raise the shell plate, lower the arm completely. I want to tighten these two X bolts. Now I want to check that the movement of the powder bar is complete. So at the down position, it's flush here, which it should be. And at the up position, the stop pin should be against the powder measure, which it is. Now I'm going to run the final check to make sure my flare has been properly maintained. This case was previously resized, so I'm going to move it. Stage 2, I'm going to flare it and check it. Okay, it looks good. Let's check the number. All right, that looks good. Well, let's see, finally the measurement matches to what I recorded earlier. Question I get asked sometimes is how far does this blue nut go up or down on the fail-safe arm? Let me explain what it helps do. As you lower the arm, when it comes to the natural stop, you want a little bit of pressure on the spring, not a lot. And as you push the arm away from you to prime your case, you can probably see the little primer arm coming up. That's where your primer comes up through and gets pushed into the case. When you let go, it's that spring that helps push the shell plate back up, which moves the arm back in position. So you want a little bit of tension here, more tension here, but you don't want to bottom out the spring. Okay, just enough so it brings it back to the natural starting point. All right, so at this time, we've got our sizing die in, we've got our powder measure in, so the right height for the bell that we want. We of course want to adjust the powder die until every die is set up. So the next step now is the bullet seating die. All right, the next step is the installation of the bullet seating die. This particular Hornady die does both seating and crimping. However, I do not like doing that in the same step. So I need to mount this die in such a way that it will not crimp the brass. Also, if you recall, I'm going to be installing the Hornady micrometer on the bullet seating die. So let's do that first. First, I remove seating stem. Now install the micrometer. Now in preparation, I want to back out the micrometer all the way. That's probably good enough. So I'm going to go ahead get it started. I'm going to take a factory fresh brass. I'm going to size it. I'm going to skip the belling or flaring. I'm going to raise the brass up till the handle bottoms out. Then I'm going to lower the die until I feel resistance. Right, there's resistance right there. Then I'm going to back it off one full turn. That's going to ensure that this die will not crimp the brass. Now I'm just going to move the lock ring down, but not overly tighten it, because what I want to do is when I'm done, I want the markings on the micrometer facing out and not like facing in the dies. So I might have to do slight adjustment. Now to adjust the micrometer, we have to know what overall length that we're going to have on our cartridge. So you're going to have to access your various resources, your reloading manuals, websites that you trust to get the overall length that you like to use. Now what I'm going to do is flare that case, see the bullet, raise it up until the handle bottoms out, and then I'm going to start turning down the micrometer. If I were just using this part to do the bullet seating, the steps would have been the same. I would have raised this out of the die, turn the die down, put in a case and bullet, and then turn this down until I get resistance. For the micrometer, it's pretty much the same. I have resistance right there. I'm going to raise the handle. Now what I'm going to do, back off the lock nut a little bit. I want to turn this until I get the gauge facing me, but I want to turn it such that I'm not inserting the die further into the press, because then I get closer to the point of crimping it. So I want to turn it such that the die is coming out. That will help ensure that it will not crimp the brass until I get my gauge where it's easily visible. We're now ready to lock down the bullet seating die. In order to help with alignment, in addition to the round at the bullet seating station, I'm going to put a case at the powder measure station and another at the sizing station. I want to raise the shell plate. What this will do is ensure that as I tighten down this die, that the shell plate and the other dies in this die stay in alignment. To make it easier to lock down the ring, I'm going to remove this secure pin and this light. And holding the die, now I can put the secure pin back in. I'm going to use an Allen key to tighten the screw. That's good. Now I'm going to remove the brass from the powder measure station and the resizing station. I'm just going to back this out a second. Raise it up. Now what I will do is I'll take this back down until it has contact. I'll drop it, I'm going to turn it down a little bit. See how far it seats the bullet. You can visually tell that it's not seated deep enough, but you want to progress this slowly. Again, you're looking for the overall length for the cartridge you're trying to make, and you would have gotten that number off of a trusted source like one of the powder manufacturers' reloading manuals or a bullet manufacturer's reloading manual. Okay, this is now seated the depth I wanted. What I would do is I would write down what this gauge is saying. That way I know when I'm reloading this bullet to the same charge, I would set it to here. If I use a different kind of bullet, a lead bullet, a round nose, then this would change based on the overall length I'm looking for, and I would record those numbers. That's one of the good features of a micrometer, is that you can record your settings so you can get back to them easily as you change your bullets. So now we've got our bullet seating die all set up. Since I am reloading straight-walled metallic cartridge that head spaces on the case mouth, the die I needed to purchase was a taper crimp die. So what do we mean by a taper crimp? As you run your brass through the sizing die, the brass should come to a uniform diameter up and down the entire case. When you run it through the expander die, it will slightly flare. Remember, slightly is a key word. The mouth of the case to make bullet seating easier. Then you seat your bullet, and then when you crimp it, what you're after is to remove that flare. This is different than a roll crimp. On a roll crimp, you're actually taking the mouth and moving it into a groove in the bullet. 32 auto head spaces on the mouth of the case. So what we're looking for is just to remove the flare. The dimension we're looking for is when you seat a bullet, where the bullet goes into the case, the diameter of the case is going to slightly expand. And so the diameter on the case where the bullet is going to be slightly bigger than the diameter of the case where the bullet is not. So what we're looking for is, after the crimp, that the diameter of the mouth of the case is the same as the diameter of the case where the bullet is located. Okay, at this point, we're going to go ahead and put in our brass locator pins, and we're going to take our crimp die and get it started. We'll take some factory fresh brass, size it, flare it, seat a bullet, and raise it up into the stage. Now, the handle's all the way down. I should not have felt any resistance, which I didn't. So now I'll turn this down until I do feel resistance. I feel resistance right there. The way I like to do it is turn the die a little bit and watch the bell slowly decrease until it's straight wall again. And just help me with turning. I'm just going to take a marker and just put a black mark on it so I can tell quarter turns. Okay, quarter turn. This looks good. What I want to do now is lock down the crimp die. But before I do that, I'm going to put a round at the crimp die station around at the bullet seeding station, and a case at the powder measure station, and at the resizing station. And when I use the word round, I'm referring to one of my dry rounds, no primer, no powder. I'm going to raise the shell plate, take the arm all the way down, holding the die. I'm going to tighten the lock ring, taking the pliers, do the final tightening. Now I'm going to take the Allen key and lock it in place. Right there. Now I'm going to lower the shell plate and remove everything from the shell plate. Put the secure pin back in. Let's start with a piece of brass. Size it. Flare it. See the bullet. And let's check the measurements. Alright, that looks good. Last thing we want to do is case gauge this cartridge. The purpose of the case gauge is just to make sure that the round fits semi specifications, and it does. It should go in without resistance. It should just drop straight in. On this case gauge, I know that the round is going to sit slightly below the top, which it does. Alright, so what is left? Well, we need to make sure all of our brass locator pins are in. If, when you inserted a case, there's no contact between the holder pin, which actually looks like a paper clip bent, then you need to loosen this Allen screw and move this back and forth until you get a secure holding there. For your load, you want to make sure you have the correct primer tube in. Since this is 32 auto, if I use my press to deprime and prime, I'd be putting in a tube for the small pistol primer. Again, if you use your press to deprime and prime, you want to make sure you have the correct size bar in here for whichever size primer you're using. And then you may ask, what do we do with all the dry ammo you created? Well, you would use your kinetic bullet puller to force the bullets out. And unless you mangle them, you'll be able to reuse the bullets and the cases. Then you want to load your hopper with powder, and based on your reloading information, start adjusting the powder bar to give you the correct charge. Another thing I do when reloading new brass is I actually clean the brass ahead of time. I just use my normal cleaning media. Now you may wonder why I clean new brass. So I've learned that new brass can cause an accumulation of brass filings on your powder funnel, which will lead to brass sticking to the funnel. If you want to learn more about the causes and fixes of that issue, I do have a separate video on that. So this is the conclusion of this video. I hope this video has been useful to you, and thank you for watching.